and I just started recording. So for the YouTube people, this is our Friday night Bible study for Friday, December 20th, 2024. And just before we decided to go live, my wife was listening to one of the items on a fairly sizable list of videos put up on YouTube by somebody, we're not sure who, a bunch of science fiction stories. And they all seem to be built on the same framework of alien creature types. For example, there's one creature that in several stories gets described as a cross between a peacock and a file cabinet. There was a 4-story collection that she put up the other day, and the primary story in it has to do with an Earth professor who goes to a galactic conference, and at the conference begins asking questions about how when they explore planets, they classify these various worlds for potential colonization. What's the criteria for a class 1 planet? And you wonder what's going on for a while, and then she gets down to what she's really after, and she reveals that her own planet does not meet the criteria they have set. And in fact, officially, her world is designated as not class 1 or 2 or 3. It's actually Death World level 11. And she then challenges that and says she thinks maybe it ought to be Death World level 13. And then they go into all the threats to the population of this planet. The predatory species, the natural disasters, the earthquakes, and the storms, and she ended up shocking her alien audience with all the terrible things that take place on Earth. Well, that got me to thinking in a more realistic global perspective. Earth is the one planet that's messed up in all of God's creation. And yes, it is a death world. Not because that's how it was made, but because that's what it became when the enemy inserted itself, herself, himself, whatever, into the operation of this planet and managed to get permission of this planet's first inhabitants to be involved, therefore making this world not what the Creator intended, but rather what living outside of the design for life causes. So I did find those stories interesting. They had some other approaches in there. There was another story out of the thing was warning the galaxy about what happens when a human says, hold my fill-in name of beverage here, like hold my beer or hold my soda or whatever. They proceed to go through and make things happen that shouldn't be possible simply because nobody ever told them they couldn't. Anyway.
This is all in the style of Douglas Adams. It's humor.
Yeah, it is. It's intended to be humor. And it's intended to some extent. Douglas Adams used his sci-fi writing to poke fun at human institutions. and these things do that to some extent. A number of them have to,
You filled out form blah blah blah.
yeah, have to do with people. How shall I put this? People stymieing aliens by being better at bureaucracy than any of the aliens, and being more officious and demanding, and everything's got to be done right according to the rules and the paperwork, and essentially they portray the human race as skilled at malicious compliance. You going to give us rules? In fact, I think one of the stories actually said, if you're going to try to impose rules on humans, don't let them read the whole rule book, because they'll go through the rule book and find loopholes and find their way out. And that's, I think, poking fun at our legal system, because you just, once you start living by the rules, you can't have enough rules, and one rule is going to conflict with another rule. So then we have lawyers who sit up nights trying to figure out how to get guilty clients off by finding some law that you know allows them to whatever. It's just, that's the human way, and it's because of how we try to control things. We aren't willing to let the Creator fix us. So we're stuck dealing with broken humans, and it doesn't matter what system we develop to do that. Some might be better than others. In the end, it's not going to work. There's going to be problems, and there's going to be things that we can ridicule, essentially. So.
One of those stories, great humor, the aliens wanted to invade, and they had decided that it would be a one battle, one person from the aliens and one person from the earth, and winner would be take all. And they would send their champion, who was trained in all aspects of military might. And the earthlings spent the craziest.
Right.
What they didn't realize was he's crazy. He won by thinking outside the box, or actually, he thought in a different box, and by using interpretive dance, he manipulated physics, which this champion had no clue how to deal with it.
Yeah.
It's humorous, but it's heavy. But
Yeah. Well.
Hey, I'm thinking if you're bored.
Yeah. Well, with that out of the way, we're going to continue in the book of Judges. We read some of this and we talked to ourselves about it, and I did a little research, so we're going to have a few things to add to it that weren't in the recording that failed to upload. So I was going to say, Facebook has changed how they do it. It used to be I could write what I was going to write, upload, start the video uploading, and then schedule the post. Well, this time, once I set the video uploading, I couldn't schedule the post. I was going to have to wait to schedule it until it got uploaded, and I finally canceled the upload here a few minutes ago, just before we went live. It still wasn't ready to go, so That's why we're going live here. So let's bow our heads and we'll get started. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for your blessings. And we thank you for being a wonderful creator who created a perfect world and a perfect and delightful place for us to live. And we know we don't live there now, but we know that you intend to fix that for us at some point. Until then, we want to be able to relate to the world and the people around us and to relate to you. As we open the written word, we seek a blessing from your Holy Spirit so that what we take out of it will uplift your character. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Got to go find my mouse cursor so I can change the scene here. We are ready for Judges chapter 16. Just before this, the end of chapter 15 noted that Samson judged Israel for 20 years. Now, assuming that he was about 20 or so when this story starts, he's probably only going to be about 40 or so when he dies. We're not sure. But the first story here in chapter 16 is a short one. It's only these 3 verses. And it says, one day Samson went to the Philistine town of Gaza and spent the night with a prostitute. Now the name Gaza survives to this day. The territory that belonged to the Philistines at that time is now part of the Palestinian territory. In fact, there are those who believe that Palestinian is what Philistine degraded into over time, so that the Palestinians are primarily descendants of the Philistines. And some of them live in a territory called the Gaza Strip, after this city's name.
Are you going to be speaking of Delilah?
Well, we're going to get there. We're not there yet.
Well, you said he went to see a woman. Are you going to be speaking of Delilah right now?
No.
Okay.
He's going to spend the night with a prostitute in Gaza.
Well, earlier in the afternoon, I'd asked you the question about Delilah. Was she a prostitute? And I was going to say that's where I got that. Right there, could be.
Yeah, but this is a totally separate person.
Well, that's what I'm asking you. Is this Delilah or someone else? And you said it was someone else.
It's someone else, yes.
Not Delilah. Okay, go on.
Word soon spread, footnote A, that Samson was there, so the men of Gaza gathered together and waited all night at the town gates. They kept quiet during the night, saying to themselves, when the light of morning comes, we will kill him. Now, the reason footnote A is there is that the Hebrew does not have that word soon spread. That comes out of the Greek and Syriac versions, and it's also found in the Vulgate. The translators of the King James inserted 4 words in italics, indicating that they're words that the translators provided that aren't found in the original language. So the Hebrew doesn't include that, but some of the translators do, just to explain what's going on, although it should be pretty obvious. Samson shows up in a Philistine town. The men of the city wait all night at the town gates because they want to kill him. But Samson stayed in bed only until midnight. Then he got up, took hold of the doors of the town gate, including the 2 posts, and lifted them up, bar and all. You got the door locked where I can't get out? Well, then I'll just take the door with me. He put them on his shoulders and carried them all the way to the top of the hill across from Hebron. Now, how far away that was, I haven't looked it up. He may have made a bit of a hike with that. We're not sure. And you had a comment when we recorded about this story.
Well, I had a comment about the whole Samson stories. You know, I wonder how much of this is real.
And how much is legend say?
Yeah. How much of it is, well, okay, Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris once had to stare down with the sun. The sun lost.
In other words, that's an example, a modern example of legend growing up around an actual character.
Right.
Yeah. Well, whatever's going on, we will note that this text is written probably by a male. We'll have a point later to discuss the viewpoint of the writer and how that affected what they said about the story. So, yeah, we've been saying all along as we go through the Old Testament that the Hebrew writers were of the mindset that if something happened, God did it. So, and we're going to see here in just a little bit how the people of that time, not just the Israelites, tended to believe that if good things happened to them, well, that was their God helping them. And the Israelites were not beyond that thinking and that mindset. Now, here's the next little bit that we got into earlier. Verse 4, sometime later, Samson fell in love with a woman named Delilah who lived in the valley of Sorek. And I looked that up. The valley of Sorek starts, what they say, about 17 miles northwest of modern Jerusalem and goes up from there. So it didn't sound to me like it would be in the territory of the Philistines. And Delilah is not identified as a Philistine woman. And in fact, there's a number in verse 5 there. There's going to show up a little bit later in the book of Judges. We'll talk about that when we get there. But at any rate, he falls in love with Delilah, who lives here in this valley of Sorek. So she may have been an Israelite woman. You know, the tellings of this story usually hold that Delilah was a Philistine woman. But it doesn't say that. And the valley of Sorek doesn't seem to me, anyway, to be Philistine territory. However, the Philistines are involved because the rulers of the Philistines, possibly as many as 5 of them, went to her and said, entice Samson to tell you what makes him so strong and how he can be overpowered and tied up securely. Then each of us, however many there were, will give you 1,100 pieces or shekels of silver. Footnote B down there is going to tell us that the 1,100 shekels is about 28 pounds or 12.5 kilograms of weight in silver. And we'll run into a place a little later which will give us a relative understanding of the value of that much silver. Essentially, they're offering her a lot of money if she can get out of Samson the, quote, secret of his strength. So Delilah said to Samson, please tell me what makes you so strong and what it would take to tie you up securely. Well, Samson's going to play into the traditional mysticism of the day. Well, there's some magic to it. If you do just this certain thing, it'll work. So he says, if I were tied up with 7 new bowstrings that have not yet been dried, these bowstrings are called thongs in another version, and wisps, I think, in the King James.
The question itself is tied up with mysticism, not just him falling for it.
Well, yeah, there must be some secret, some mystical explanation for your strength. It's not natural. So tell us what it is. And, they want to know so they can defeat him.
And he's stupid enough to tell them.
Well, we're going to talk about that as we go on here. So he tells her this bit about the 7 bowstrings or whatever they are. He says, I'd become as weak as anyone else. So the Philistine rulers brought Delilah 7 new bowstrings, and she tied Samson up with them. She had hidden some men in one of the inner rooms of her house, and she cried out, Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you. But Samson snapped the bowstrings as a piece of string snaps when it is burned by a fire. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. There's a saying. George Bush had a little trouble recalling the saying in a speech. It became a kind of a off-repeated recording. The saying is, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. In other words, the first time around, as described here with the bowstrings, well, that's on Delilah. She chose to try to help the Philistines defeat Samson in order to get their reward. Afterward, verse 10, Delilah said to him, you've been making fun of me and telling me lies. In other words, she's gaslighting him. Now, please tell me how you can be tied up securely. Samson replied, if I were tied up with brand new ropes that have never been used, I would become as weak as anyone else. Well, who's it on this time? She's already made it clear that she's allied with the Philistines and they are using her to try to get to him. He should know that by now. And what I begin to wonder about this story, we have in the past talked about the evolutionary adaptation of the human race dealing with powerful emotional triggers, such as fright, the fight, flight, freeze mechanism. What happens is that the limbic brain takes control in such situations, and to prevent any delay caused by the rational brain wanting to think this through, the rational brain gets shut down so that the fight, flight, freeze mechanism can get you out of trouble, and then the rational brain can come back in and figure it out afterwards. If Samson is as messed up by this woman as it sounds like he is, his rational brain may not be available to him when she starts gaslighting him, and so he's unable to process properly that, hey, I need to get away from this woman. She's trying to destroy me. So at any rate, Delilah took new ropes, tied him up with them. The men were hiding in the inner room as before, and again Delilah cried out, Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you. But again, Samson snapped the ropes from his arms as if they were thread. Then Delilah said, you've been making fun of me and telling me lies. Now tell me how you can be tied up securely. Now, the saying says, fool me once and fool me twice. It doesn't go on to times 3 and 4. But I would think that after time 2, it would really be true that if you keep fooling me from here on out, it's shame on me. Samson replied, this is verse 13, if you were to weave the 7 braids of my hair into the fabric on your loom and tighten it with a loom shuttle, I would become as weak as anyone else. Or the bar or the beam. It depends on which version is rendering it. When we recorded this, I talked about the loom. I forget the exact size of it, but it sticks in my head. It was around 16 feet wide in an industrial weaving situation. And they had a whole wide area of the factory floor walled off because that's where the shuttle came out as it wove fabric in that big industrial loom. And it moved pretty fast, so it wouldn't have been safe for anybody to be in that area because of how fast and how far it moved to do that whole 16 feet. At any rate. So while he slept, Delilah wove the 7 braids of his hair into the fabric. She tightened it with a loom shuttle. Footnote C. As in the Greek version and the Latin Vulgate, the Hebrew lacks, I would become as weak as anyone else. So while he slept, Delilah wove the 7 braids of his hair into the fabric. Then she tightened it with a loom shuttle. That's apparently an explanation that she did what he told her to do, whereas in the original Hebrew, they leave that out and you just assume that that's what happened. And so then she tightened with a loom shuttle. Again she cried out, Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you. But Samson woke up, pulled back the loom shuttle, yanked his hair away from the loom and the fabric. So that didn't work. Now, some commentators have pointed out that this 3rd time around, Samson has in some ways weakened because now he's given her a fake cause of his strength that is closer to what really defeated him. Then Delilah pouted, verse 15, how can you tell me I love you when you don't share your secrets with me? You've made fun of me 3 times now, and you still haven't told me what makes you so strong. She tormented with her nagging day after day until he was sick to death of it. And again, we wonder, why didn't he leave her? Well, he was a man, she was a woman. That's why he didn't leave her. He wanted what she, a woman, had to offer him.
And she was apparently willing to give it to him.
Apparently, yeah.
Which in that culture was not supposed to be done.
Yeah.
But then it doesn't exactly say that, does it?
Doesn't exactly say what?
That they were intimate.
No, it doesn't. But I think that's what everybody believes about the story. I mean, why else would she have such power over him? Finally, Samson shared his secret with her. My hair has never been cut, he confessed, for I was dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as anyone else. Now, that sounds mystical, doesn't it?
Weak as water.
All you have to do is cut my hair, and I break my vow, and the mystical support I've had for strength will go away and I'll be weak. I wonder if perhaps to some extent what happened here was not what we in our day might call placebo effect. Someone once wrote, if you think your food will hurt you, it most certainly will. If you believe that a certain event will change you and your abilities, that event might actually change them, even if there is no reality-based link between the one thing and the other thing. I mean, hair does not produce strength. That's just simple reality of human anatomy. But maybe Samson believed it so much, and when his head was shaved, he lost heart. Delilah realized he had finally told her the truth, so she sent for the Philistine rulers. Come back one more time, she said, for he has finally told me a secret. So the Philistine rulers returned with the money in their hands. How much?
1,100?
1,100 shekels each. But remember the number. So the Philistine rulers returned with the money in their hands. Delilah lulled Samson to sleep with his head in her lap, and we questioned if there might have been some chemical assistance provided.
Did she knock him out?
Yeah. And then she called in a man to shave off the 7 locks of his hair. In this way, she began to bring him down, and his strength left him.
Yeah, he had to be drugged. To sleep through somebody shaving his head.
Could be. Okay, and the footnote there for that just says she began to torment him. The Greek version reads he began to grow weak. They're both included in most versions that these things happened.
He knew how to pick women.
What'd you say?
He knew how to pick women.
Yeah. Then she cried out, Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you. When he woke up, he thought, I will do as before and shake myself free. But he didn't realize the Lord had left him. Well, I don't think he left him, but he may have let him succumb to his own beliefs. So the Philistines captured him and gouged out his eyes. They took him to Gaza, where he was bound with bronze chains and forced to grind grain in the prison. But before long, his hair began to grow back. How long, we don't know. Probably not even a year. It's not real clear here. The Philistine rulers held a great festival, offering sacrifices and praising their god Dagon. Now, Dagon, we will find out later in the story, was a fish-like deity. And the Philistines lived along the coast. There's some belief that they were a seafaring race. They were at least probably fishers, and so they had a large portion of their diet would be fish. So it would make sense that their god would be in the form of a fish. They said, our God has given us victory over our enemy Samson. Well, this fish god isn't a god at all. He isn't a living entity. He couldn't have done that, but that's what the people in that time tended to believe. And as we've noted, the Hebrews were not immune to that kind of thinking. When the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, Our God has delivered our enemy to us. The one who killed so many of us is now in our power." Half drunk by now, the people demanded, "Bring out Samson so he can amuse us." So he was brought from the prison to amuse them, and they had him stand between the pillars supporting the roof. Samson said to the young servant who was leading him by the hand, "Place my hands against the pillars that hold up the temple. I want to rest against them." Now the temple was completely filled with people. All the Philistine rulers were there, and there were about 3,000 men and women on the roof who were watching as Samson amused them. Having read through this, now I know what it's going to say. It says they were on the roof watching Samson, and Samson is leaning against the pillars that hold up the roof. Think about that as we imagine what's about to happen here. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, "Sovereign Lord, remember me again, O God. Please strengthen me just one more time. With one blow, let me pay back the Philistines for the loss of my 2 eyes." Then Samson put his hands on the 2 center pillars that held up the temple. Pushing against them with both hands, he prayed, "Let me die with the Philistines." And the temple crashed down on the Philistine rulers and all the people. So he killed more people when he died than he had during his entire lifetime. We did a sermon presentation on the story of Samson over a year ago. And in that, I pondered this as an epitaph on your tombstone. He killed more people when he died than he had during his entire lifetime. As if somehow that's something to be remembered and commended. No, it's not. Later, his brothers and other relatives.
In the same company as Hitler. Hitler tried to commit genocide against the Jews, and Samson was going after the Philistines.
Yes. Later, his brothers and other relatives went down to get his body. They took him back home and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol, where his father Manoah was buried. Samson had judged Israel for 20 years. And this story, to some extent, is the predecessor to the modern stereotype that strong men aren't that brilliant. Samson was apparently a muscular person with greater than usual strength. But that didn't mean that he was particularly intelligent. Actually, as we suggested, he may have been more intelligent than he looks here because of the whole limbic brain, rational brain thing that goes on. So, we go on. There's a story that takes just one chapter. That's the next, well, actually 2 chapters. This chapter and the next chapter. This is titled Micah's Idols. There was a man named Micah who lived in the hill country of Ephraim. One day he said to his mother, "I heard you place a curse on the person who stole 1,100 pieces of silver from you. Well, I have the money. I was the one who took it." And they give the same thing there about the 1,100 shekels. Now, where have we heard about 1,100 shekels before? Wasn't it in the previous story?
I looked at it.
Yeah. Delilah got 1,100 pieces of silver from each of the Philistine rulers. And we know that Samson was from the tribe of Dan. The tribe of Dan is going to enter this story. And that he was born in a town that's relatively close to Jerusalem. So there's evidence that this story takes place shortly after the story of Samson. And in that case, I begin to wonder, who is Micah's mother? Might Micah's mother not be Delilah? And now we know where these 1,100 pieces of silver came from. The Lord bless you for admitting it, his mother replied. He returned the money to her, and she said, I now dedicate these silver coins to Yahweh. In honor of my son, I will have an image carved and an idol cast. She wants to honor Yahweh, dedicate this money that has been restored to her to the Lord, to the Creator. Now, the rules were that the Creator was to be worshipped only at Shiloh, and the commandment was not to make a graven image. But we know that the Israelites did it anyway, and they would mingle the deities around them with Yahweh and have these artifacts that actually mingle the symbolisms of surrounding gods and of Yahweh, which is probably what's going on here. So when he returned the money to his mother, she took 200 silver coins, now 900 are left, gave them to a silversmith who made them into an image and an idol. All these were placed in Micah's house. Micah set up a shrine for the idol, and he made a sacred ephod and some household idols. Then he installed one of his sons as his personal priest. In other words, why travel all the way to Shiloh? I'll just set up a shrine right here. I can worship right here. I won't have to bother traveling. And I'll just name one of my sons as my priest. And now we come to the first verse that we hold is the reason for writing this book, or at least this portion of the book of Judges, starting with the story of Micah and continuing with the story of Benjamin, which is, we haven't gotten there yet. In those days, Israel had no king. All the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. Well, that's a problem when you're in a world with broken people. Because what's right in one person's eyes, particularly with their self-focus, might be very destructive to another person and entirely wrong in that person's eyes. So then we end up with accusations and counter-accusations and conflict and the need for judges. And at some point, somebody somewhere, probably the Babylonians, who had that code of Hammurabi, thought, well, if we write down the rules and have laws, and then we have an authority figure to enforce those laws, then people won't do what's right in their own eyes. They'll do what's right in the eyes of society as a whole. And then we had government. And we pointed out in the past that God did not want Israel to have a king, but they wanted it. And so somebody in Israel is writing this document and recording these events with the goal of pointing out how bad it is when there isn't a king in the land. One day, a young Levite who had been living in Bethlehem in Judah arrived in that area. He had left Bethlehem in search of another place to live, and as he traveled, he came to the hill country of Ephraim. He happened to stop at Micah's house as he was traveling through. "Where are you from?" Micah asked him. He replied, "I am a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, and I am looking for a place to live." "Stay here with me," Micah said, "and you can be a father and priest to me. I will give you 10 pieces of silver a year, plus a change of clothes and your food." The Levite agreed to this, and the young man became like one of Micah's sons. Now you stop and think about that a little bit. He gets his food, he gets a change of clothes, he has a place to stay, plus he gets these 10 pieces of silver. So he has a little money for extras. His needs are met, plus extras. 10 pieces of silver a year, not a lot. We suggested there were 900 pieces left, maybe more of them got used up. But suppose that he only had 700 pieces of silver yet left. Out of those 700 at 10 pieces a year, he had 70 years worth of income for this Levite. Well, at any rate, the Levite agreed to this, and the young man became like one of Micah's sons. Well, he had his son being his priest before, so now the Levite is his son and his priest. So Micah installed the Levite as his personal priest, and he lived in Micah's house. Quote, "I know the Lord will bless me now," Micah said, "because I have a Levite serving as my priest." Kind of interesting, the mindset there. The law, the 10 Commandment law, specifically said no graven images. He's got graven images there in his house. But somehow he can buy God's blessing if he has a Levite serving as his priest.
He also believes that he can't have a relationship with the Lord unless he has someone between him and the Lord.
Well, that's an unfortunate effect of having a religious institution, because of the human tendency for specialization. So I do my work, and then I get somebody to build my house for me, and I get somebody to watch my health for me, and I get somebody to watch my money for me, and I pay somebody to deal with my relationship with God so that I don't have to. I pay for these things to be done on my behalf. If I get in trouble with the law, I pay somebody to be my advocate in court, to know the law and to represent my interests in court. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that's how we think. So when religion comes around, we tend to think, well, I'll pay this person and he'll be the interface between me and God, and I don't have to mess with it. The problem is, a relationship with your Creator doesn't work that way. Somebody else can't have your relationship with God for you. You have to do it yourself. Anyway, next chapter, continuing the story. Now, in those days, Israel had no king, where we heard that before. And the tribe of Dan was trying to find a place where they could settle, for they had not yet moved into the land assigned to them when the land was divided among the tribes of Israel. So the men of Dan chose from their clans 5 capable warriors from the towns of Zorah and Eshtaol to scout out a land for them to settle in. When these warriors arrived in the hill country of Ephraim, they came to Micah's house and spent the night there. While at Micah's house, they recognized the young Levite's accent. So they went over and asked him, "Who brought you here, and what are you doing in this place? Why are you here?" He told them about his agreement with Micah and that he had been hired as Micah's personal priest. And then they said, "Ask God whether or not our journey will be successful." Oh, another very human thing. We would like to know the future. We are risk averse, which, we need to be risk averse in a highly risky world. I mean, the death planet we live on, we ought to be careful about risk, but we get so risk averse that we hesitate to go into the unknown. And nothing is more unknown than the future. So throughout the ages, humanity has sought ways to predict the future so that they can reduce the uncertainty of it. So these Danites are engaging in that same mystical thing. Ask God whether or not our journey will be successful. "Go in peace," the priest replied, "for the Lord is watching over your journey." Doesn't say whether he actually checked with God on it. He just says nice things to them. Customer service face. So the 5 men went on to the town of Laish, where they noticed the people living carefree lives like the Sidonians. They were peaceful and secure. Let's see. Footnote A, the meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain. All right. The people were also wealthy because their land was very fertile, and they lived a great distance from Sidon and had no allies nearby. When the men returned to Zorah and Eshtaol, their relatives asked them, "What did you find?" The men replied, "Come on, let's attack them. We have seen the land, and it is very good. What are you waiting for? Don't hesitate to go and take possession of it. When you get there, you will find the people living carefree lives. God has given us a spacious and fertile land, lacking in nothing." So,
armed robbery in the name of the Lord. God will bless you.
Yeah. So 600 men from the tribe of Dan, armed with weapons of war, set out from Zorah and Eshtaol. They camped at a place west of Kiriath Jearim in Judah, which is called Mahana Dan to this day, or the camp of Dan to this day. Then they went on from there into the hill country of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah. The 5 men who had scouted out the land around Laish explained to the others, "These buildings contain a sacred ephod as well as some household idols, a carved image, and a cast idol. What do you think you should do?" Now, mind you, there's 120 times as many people here now as there were when they first came through, and all of them are armed for war. Then the 5 men turned off the road and went over to Micah's house where the young Levite lived and greeted him kindly. As the 600 armed warriors from the tribe of Dan stood at the entrance of the gate, the 5 scouts entered the shrine and removed the carved image, the sacred ephod, the household idols, and the cast idol. Meanwhile, the priest was standing at the gate with the 600 armed warriors. When the priest saw the man carrying all the sacred objects out of Micah's shrine, he said, "What are you doing?" "Be quiet and come with us," they said. "Be a father and a priest to all of us. Isn't it better to be a priest for an entire tribe and clan of Israel than for the household of just one man?" The young man was quite happy to go with them. So he took along the sacred ephod, the household idols, and the carved image. Then they turned and started on their way again, placing their children, livestock, and possessions in front of them. When the people from the tribe of Dan were quite a distance from Micah's house, the people who lived near Micah came chasing after them. They were shouting as they caught up with them. The men of Dan turned around and said to Micah, "What's the matter? Why have you called these men together and chased after us like this?" "What do you mean, what's the matter?" Micah replied. "You've taken away all the gods I have made, and my priests, and I have nothing left." Well, if he had actually had a relationship with his Creator, he wouldn't have needed all this other stuff. It wouldn't have mattered. He would have still had it, even if they took the physical stuff away from him. At any rate, he's complaining. The men of Dan said, "Watch what you say. There are some short-tempered men around here who might get angry and kill you and your family." Well, now we're dealing in threats. So the men of Dan continued on their way. When Micah saw that there were too many of them for him to attack, he turned around and went home. Then, with Micah's idols and his priests, the men of Dan came to the town of Laish, whose people were peaceful and secure. They attacked with swords and burned the town to the ground. There was no one to rescue the people, for they lived a great distance from Sidon and had no allies nearby. This happened in the valley near Beth Rehob. Then the people of the tribe of Dan rebuilt the town and lived there. They renamed the town Dan after their ancestor Israel's son, but it had originally been called Laish. Then they set up the carved image, and they appointed Jonathan, son of Gershom, son of Moses, as their priest. Now, son may mean descendant, not son, because we're dealing here 400 or more years after the Exodus. But this priest was apparently named Jonathan, and he was descended from the clan of Gershom, one of the sons of Moses. At any rate, as their priest, as in an ancient Hebrew tradition, some Greek manuscripts in the Latin Vulgate, the Masoretic text reads son of Manasseh. Well, okay, anyway. This family continued as priests for the tribe of Dan until the exile. So Micah's carved image was worshipped by the tribe of Dan as long as the tabernacle of God remained at Shiloh. Now, if this section of Judges was written in the time of Samuel to encourage people to ask for a king, then this note about the exile would have to have been edited in later. It wouldn't have been in the original document written at the time of Samuel. And then it says, so Micah's carved image was worshipped by the tribe of Dan as long as the tabernacle of God remained at Shiloh. Well, that was a shorter period of time, but it would have still been there when this book was originally written, if in fact it was written as we think, to encourage the people to call for a king. That was in the time of Samuel. In the time of Samuel, the tabernacle of God was there at Shiloh. So, moving on. Now, I said some time ago that this book might be described as a case of Israelite men behaving badly. And we've encountered a lot of bad behavior so far in this book. But we're about to come on something exceptionally vile and misbehavior indications. Now, in those days, Israel had no king. We're coming across that again. Again, making it sound to us like they were trying to promote having a king in Israel. There was a man from the tribe of Levi living in a remote area of the hill country of Ephraim. One day he brought home a woman from Bethlehem in Judah to be his concubine. But she became angry with him and returned to her father's home in Bethlehem. Now, most biblical versions, in place of saying she became angry with him, will say something like she played the whore or she was unfaithful to him. How are we to understand this? The playing the whore reading is pretty clearly what the Hebrew manuscripts say. They became angry with him is based on the Greek versions. In fact, let's go down and look at the footnote that this version puts in there. They just say, or she was unfaithful to him. However, the Greek reading more tends to become this. Now, there was somebody a scholar who put out a theory that perhaps the original Hebrew was written in the same way, but that later Hebrew authors, with their biases, felt like they had to say that she was unfaithful. Another explanation that is given is that in the male-dominated mindset of the time, the woman had no right to divorce. So if she left, it would be assumed that she intended to be sexually unfaithful. And so the writer wrote from that perspective. However,
there is still to this day people who believe that if a man abuses his wife, it's her fault.
Yeah, she wasn't good enough. She didn't meet his needs properly.
He deserved the abuse.
Yeah.
I'm only hitting you because I love you.
Yeah, right. Well, that's a good way to dodge personal accountability, but it may not work in front of a judge. When I say personal accountability, our own consciences will try to hold us accountable for our actions, but we may tell ourselves lies to quiet our consciences so that we don't have to deal with our own personal brokenness.
There are churches who teach that.
Who teach what?
Well, I think of a certain radio caster. When you were doing Christian radio, who told about his daughter who came to him crying, begging for help because her husband was beating her. And his response was to go back to her husband, get on her knees, and beg him to forgive her for whatever it was she had done to him.
Yeah. Well, he was particularly misogynistic. That was one of his trademarks. Yeah. After we recorded this, I got out a book that I have in the bookshelf over here. It's God of Sense and Traditions of Nonsense by Sigby Tonstad. And he has a whole chapter in that book about this story. And he takes a position and he puts in quite a lot of references to support it. That this woman left this man from the tribe of Levi, living in the hill country of Ephraim. She left him because he was abusing her. She returned to her father's home. After about 4 months,
when he got there to get her, when the man got there to get his concubine, her father tried to keep her there.
Yeah, rather weakly, but he did. After about 4 months, her husband set out for Bethlehem to speak personally to her and persuade her to come back. I wonder if he told her the kinds of things guys will say today. I've changed. I won't do it anymore. Please forgive me. You've got to forgive me and let me back. Blah, 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 blah. He took with him a servant and a pair of donkeys. When he arrived at her father's house, footnote B, when she brought him to, the Hebrew reads, the Greek version says when he came to, all right. Her father saw him and welcomed him. Her father urged him to stay a while, so he stayed 3 days, eating, drinking, and sleeping there. On the 4th day, the man was up early, ready to leave, but the woman's father said to his son-in-law, have something to eat before you go. I think it's a case of he's trying to delay the inevitable. He hasn't got the strength of character to tell this man, given what you've done to my daughter, you can't take her back. But he's trying to delay it.
Well, he may have sold the daughter to the man, and the daughter was now the man's property.
Well, that's entirely likely. Yeah. So he didn't feel like legally he could do anything. And we're about to see that women didn't count for much in those days, so. The 2 men sat down together and had something to eat and drink. Then the woman's father said, please stay another night and enjoy yourself. The man got up to leave, but his father-in-law kept urging him to stay, so he finally gave in and stayed the night. On the morning of the 5th day, he was up early again, ready to leave. And again the woman's father said, have something to eat, then you can leave later this afternoon. So they had another day of feasting. Later, as the man and his concubine and servant were preparing to leave, his father-in-law said, look, it's almost evening. Stay the night and enjoy yourself. Tomorrow you can get up early and be on your way. How long is this going to go on? Well, I suppose as long as the father can get away with it, huh? But this time the man was determined to leave. So he took his 2 saddled donkeys and his concubine and headed in the direction of Jebus, that is, Jerusalem. It was late in the day when they neared Jebus, and the man's servant said to him, let's stop at this Jebusite town and spend the night there. No, his master said, we can't stay in this foreign town where there are no Israelites. Yeah, can anybody say xenophobia? Instead, we will go on to Gibeah. Come on, let's try to get as far as Gibeah or Ramah, and we'll spend the night in one of those towns. So they went on. The sun was setting as they came to Gibeah, a town in the land of Benjamin. So they stopped there to spend the night. They rested in the town square, but no one took them in for the night. Now, at this point, I want to point you back to a story we covered way in the early part of this year in the book of Genesis. The story of Lot in the city of Sodom. And if you will remember what happened when Lot encountered 2 strangers in the town square and invited them into his house. Keep that in mind now as we read this story. That evening an old man came home from his work in the fields. He was from the hill country of Ephraim, but he was living in Gibeah, where the people were from the tribe of Benjamin. When he saw the travelers sitting in the town square, he asked them where they were from and where they were going. We have been in Bethlehem in Judah, the man replied. We are on our way to a remote area in the hill country of Ephraim, which is my home. I traveled to Bethlehem and now I'm returning home. Footnote C. That's as in the Greek version, see also 1929. The Hebrew is, now I'm going to the tabernacle of the Lord. All right, well, anyway. But no one has taken us in for the night, even though we have everything we need. We have straw and feed for our donkeys and plenty of bread and wine for ourselves. We're not going to impose on you. We just need a place to stay. You are welcome to stay with me, the old man said. I'll give you anything you might need. But whatever you do, don't spend the night in the square. Did this man know something? So he took them home with him and fed the donkeys. After they washed their feet, they ate and drank together. While they were enjoying themselves, a crowd of troublemakers from the town surrounded the house. They began beating at the door and shouting to the old man, "Bring out the man who's staying with you so we can have sex with him." Now, another thing that Sigby Tonstad pointed out in his recount of this story, he did liken this to the story of Lot and Sodom, but he also suggested that what's going on here is not homosexuality. This is an intent to humiliate and demean the visitors. You aren't one of us. You don't belong here. We're going to humiliate you. And this is how we're going to do it.
I thought you were reading Greg Boyd's book.
I don't know that Greg Boyd mentions this, but I know Sigby Tonstad has a whole chapter on it.
Okay.
The old man stepped outside to talk to them. "No, my brothers, don't do such an evil thing, for this man is a guest in my house, and such a thing would be shameful. Here, take my virgin daughter and this man's concubine. I will bring them out to you, and you can abuse them and do whatever you like, but don't do such a shameful thing to this man." Does that have echoes in the story of Lot? What was Lot about to do when his visitors stopped him?
I'm thinking this concubine may have run to her dad for protection. Her dad failed to provide it for her, though he tried. But look what this man just did to his daughter.
Yeah. Well, look what Lot did to his daughters. He was going to send them out. I heard you through the door. I didn't hear you over the phone.
Threw them to the wolves.
Yeah. But they wouldn't listen to him. So the Levite took hold of his concubine and pushed her out the door. The men of the town abused her all night, taking turns raping her until morning. Finally, at dawn, they let her go. At daybreak, the woman returned to the house where her husband was staying. She collapsed at the door of the house and lay there until it was light.
You know, I have to say that I had a lot of problems the way my dad treated me. However, he would have acted to take down the whole town with his bare hands if anybody had tried anything like that with me. And he knew about it.
Yeah.
He would never throw me to the wolves like that. I feel so sorry for those women.
Yeah.
Women need a champion.
When her husband opened the door to leave, there lay his concubine with her hands on the threshold. He said, "Get up, let's go." But there was no answer. So he put her body on his donkey and took her home. And Sigve Tonstad responded to this part by saying, he brings insensitivity to Olympic levels. The Greek version adds, "for she was dead." Well, that's pretty obvious. When he got home, he took a knife and cut his concubine's body into 12 pieces. Then he sent one piece to each tribe throughout all the territory of Israel. Everyone who saw it said, "Such a horrible crime has not been committed in all the time since Israel left Egypt." Think about it. What are we going to do? Who's going to speak up? Well, this story is not over, but we don't have time to continue it tonight. Well, what do you think? We got about 15 minutes. Want to keep going?
Well, I'm thinking I want you to look around the house and see if you can find any of my old elementary Bible textbooks. Because I can remember sitting in class and we actually studied this story.
Wow.
And I can remember the teacher defending this man for sending out these body parts.
Okay, is that where you got the idea that he kicked her when he got out of the house in the morning?
I'm wondering. I don't remember, but it's possible.
I don't recall this story being covered when I was in elementary school. Or did they kind of gloss over what happened and just tell you about him carving up the body?
I don't remember. How long ago was this?
Yeah, a day or two.
I have good memory about some things, but some things I didn't care about. I love the Lord, even when I was a kid, but I just couldn't connect with a God that was out there telling people to kill each other.
Yeah.
A God that was telling even in our day, telling people, spare the rod and spoil the child, child abuse.
Yeah.
I couldn't buy it. It didn't make sense. So I never really listened or paid a whole lot of attention to what was being taught in Bible class. But some of that stuff does stick in my memory.
It's interesting that you said it didn't make sense. That is the foundation of Sigve Tonstad's book, God of Sense and Traditions of Nonsense. And his argument was that God makes sense. So if people are telling you that he doesn't make sense, and there is a long religious tradition that God doesn't make sense, they're wrong. That's essentially what he was saying there.
And I never got baptized into the Adventist church until I was almost 17 years old. And the reason I refused is because I couldn't comprehend why I should worship a God that was going to kill me if I didn't take a dunk? And you know what? I still don't understand that.
No, all right. Oh. Traditions of nonsense. God doesn't make sense. Don't try to figure him out. That's what Sigviton said argues against in that book. But there are a lot of people who will tell you, don't try and figure out God. This, what I'm saying here is contradictory to what I said over there. Well, that's because God doesn't make any sense. Don't try and make me make sense. Don't try and make me consistent.
What is illegal for us is good for God. That's what I've been told.
Yeah, well,
You know, like this, what was it that I was told that about? Legalism. I don't remember, but there was some legalistic teaching, and I pointed out how it was not an act of love, and the person agreed with me. You're right, it's not an act of love. For us, it's a crime. But for God, it's an act of love.
I'd say that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Look,
How can you say that godliness or godlikeness is the goal to be reached if somehow God's not the same as what we're supposed to be? God's this, you're supposed to be that, but then you're supposed to become like God. You're supposed to be reformed in His image. You know, there's a cognitive disconnect here.
I don't have the mental capacity to understand nonsense.
Well, if you think you have the mental capacity to understand nonsense, then you've engaged in what we call sophistry. Sophistry is an attempt to make the nonsensical make sense, to pretend like what's broken isn't broken and is just fine. That,
But you're not supposed to try to make sense of it. You're supposed to just swallow it and not ask questions. Because if you ask questions, God will zap you.
so then why did God give you a brain?
Oh, I believe it's so you can take it out and play with it.
Well, I'm looking at our time here. We're a little bit short of what we usually do. When we recorded this, we ended right there where we were in Judges 19, and I'm beginning to think that we ought to just stop there and plan to pick up with the rest of the book of Judges next week.
Bring me my, when you get done and you have a moment, bring me my book, Principles of Life.
Where will I find that?
Well, it's going to be in a bookcase, but I suspect it's going to be in there by my desk. If you sit down and face that old computer and look to your right in that paper tray, I think I had it sitting in that paper tray.
Well, you used that book to write a response, a fairly lengthy response that you called Principles of Death. And you had it at your computer for that, so.
Yeah, it's, I suspect it's there, and I seriously doubt that you've moved it.
Well, like you say, when we're done, I can go look and see if I can find it. Are you thinking maybe it's from that book that discussion was had about this story?
No, but it might have something in that book, and that book has scribbles all over it from even back before I was in high school. The person before me took notes, and the notes are in the book. the person who had the book before me took notes and wrote them directly into the book.
Yeah. Well,
There might be something in there. That would be the first place I would look. But what I'm remembering was an elementary teacher. It was a female, and not sure which one. And I don't remember. I would narrow it down to two different teachers, but I don't remember which grade they taught.
okay.
It was third and fourth, or third or fourth. I really don't remember. It's been a long time.
Yeah. Well, so let's go ahead and call an end to it this evening. Please feel free to join us next week when we will continue this. And until that time, we say goodbye and God bless.
Oh, wait.
Yes?
You don't get up yet?
No?
Okay. If anybody is out there listening that is familiar with this story, the thing I'm remembering that I want to find is I remember a teacher. Oh, I'm getting confused. What were we talking about?
When?
Well, I'm wanting to know where I came up with the idea. Okay, I remember. I remember the teacher standing up in front of the classroom talking about the body being chopped up into different parts and shipped out to different parts of Israel. And she was defending it. That's what I said I was going to look up. But also, if anybody can remember that, let us know. And if you can remember or have any idea where I came up with the idea that the man kicked his concubine when he found her at the threshold dead. He kicked her and said, "Come on, let's go." We couldn't find that in the Bible. But I don't know. Somewhere I got the idea that happened, and I'm wondering if anybody out there has also been given that impression.
Okay.
Let me know. Let one of us know, Autumn or me, either one. Just either make a note here or send us a private message.
Okay.
And I'm going to look at those old textbooks and see if you can find the old textbooks and see if there's something in there.
Well, okay. So, goodbye.
Night.